It's a bit sandy, but it's got a bit of country in there, eh?
Buckle down.
So I just saw Hyena Road. For any of you who are Americans, you will have absolutely no idea what that movie is. Absolutely none. This is purely just a Canadian film that's made by Paul Gross. Oh, Paul Gross. We've had an interesting relationship. You were sweet as the Mountie in New York, even though that show was filmed in Toronto. You were funny in Men with Brooms. You completely gypped me in Passchendaele, and then Gunless? Well, screw that movie. So, either way, Paul Gross is probably one of the most prominent Canadian filmmakers in our country. He literally makes a lot of movies about Canadian stuff in Canada, and he's probably one of the highest... He's basically one of the most popular Canadian directors who makes Canadian films. He's never gonna break out of that mold, really, like Denis Villeneuve. The one time that Paul Gross has actually really impressed me was Shaking Hands with the Devil, which was all about the entire Hotel Rwanda crisis and how his character, who was a Canadian general of the UN forces, basically had his hands tied the entire time, and he was trying every single moment of every single day to do something, and he couldn't. And he had great emotional stress, and his character was fantastic in that movie. So I've always kind of given him the benefit of the doubt for this movie. Hyena Road is about Canadian forces in Afghanistan and how they were trying to build this highway road that would basically, I don't know, do something with supply shipments and civilian roads. The funny thing about this movie is it's about a road, yet you really have no idea what this road is about. Almost none. Which is kind of, I don't mind so much, because if it had been, it would have been boring as hell. But what it's about is this old rebellious fighter who fought for Afghani forces when the Russians were invading. And they're trying to kind of relocate him because there's this insurgency of this very slippery Al-Qaeda force that is like with the Canadians one day and then with Al-Qaeda the next. But the thing is, we don't really know much about this bad guy except for the fact that he puts on sunglasses all villainous-like and has this really good downward evil upward stare. The film focuses on two main characters, Joseph Sutherland, who is the son of Donald Sutherland, which means he must be a brother of Keith Sutherland, which is kind of interesting. His character's name is Mark. And then Paul Gross. This is actually what I liked about it. He didn't put himself as the main character. He put himself as kind of a side character. His character's name is Pete Mitchell, and he's an intelligence captain, which was interesting because he actually doesn't know how to fight. What he is an intelligence man. His character is the most interesting person in this film because of just what he does and how he communicates with people and how he's making deals with sort of local forces in an attempt to try and get this guy called the Ghost, who is this legendary rebellious fighter who fought against the Russians. What they want is put him on their side, but then there's the parts that are actually really good about this movie, which is talking about the laws and the rules of war. And there are a lot of moments where you actually have a bit of an emotional strain, because while they have to do what is within the bounds of the rules of war, you actually you've seen this before when they're like, oh, they can't shoot because they're not being engaged. It's not super original, but it actually does pull a few heartstrings, and it kind of gives you a little bit of a moral ambiguity. But the bastard still threw in a freaking love story. Why is he always obsessed with putting in stupid love stories, like in Passchendaele? I was expecting a film about the Canadian forces in the First World War. That's gonna be awesome, right? No, fuck that. It's about an hour and 40 minutes of a stupid love story, and then we get 20 minutes of the actual battle, which gets Hollywoodized as fudged. Now, speaking of fight scenes in this movie, the Canadian budget shows, because there's a lot of shots of bang, 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 and then cutting back to the Taliban, bang, 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 and you don't see half of all those kind of, ricochets or static flares. You can tell the budget is very limited in this movie. But there are certain moments where the budget goes way up for, like, I don't know, a single cut, and the brutality is insane for those, like, 5 shots in the movie. And you can see the movie's ending from like a mile away just because. But But the thing is, while this film has similar story types to Passchendaele, it actually has a very interesting message at the end. The whole time Paul Gross is kind of giving this narration, and one of the parts of his narration is talking about how Alexander the Great tried to conquer Afghanistan and how it basically drove him insane. And what's so great about it is he actually pretty much... There's been a few films that have kind of strayed this way, but he's the one who basically outright says it, that there's no way they're going to win. There's a difference between Mark's character and Pete. And what Mark wants is he believes that you can win the war with a bullet. If you shoot the right person, you can win the war. Pete is like, you can't. There's no way. We're basically waiting until foreign policy kicks us out. And the funny thing is, Mark's way is in the end their downfall, because he tries what he thinks is right, and in the end it's not. It's great, because that's the message that I wanted to see in a war about Afghanistan, the Iraqi conflict, that I've been waiting for quite some time, is that this war basically will not end. Like, if the Ruskies couldn't freaking get Afghanistan in the 80s, and they were actually invading, there's no way we have a chance of doing anything. So what the film talks about really is the futility of it all, and how whatever advances they may make, they're always taking the same step back, and how nothing really changes, and how it's always going to just keep on coming back in a circle. And that was what I applaud Paul Gross for doing, is for actually doing a movie that actually had a moral ambiguity that I could care about and I could get behind. Sure, some of the other stuff is like some of the fight scenes are interesting, but the cinematography is so bad. Okay, have you not learned, Paul, that doing this is so much worse than having a still action frame? So either way, I thought this movie was alright. It wasn't super bad, whereas there were some issues with the film, especially the love story, some of the very cheap action scenes. There were scenes that were very well done. There was actually some good humor in it, which is typical of Paul Gross. He usually has a very good humor side. And you know what? I don't feel like this was him kind of about his own image, because I don't know if Paul Gross is like that, but I really got that from Passchendaele and Gunless. So I thought that this movie was much better because he didn't put himself in the forefront. He put someone else. And I think that this film's message is actually very well done. So in the end, I'll give Hyena Road a 4 out of 7. And that's it. You know who actually, the funny thing about this is, it's a Canadian movie, and it was so Canadian that no one else was in the theater. I went and saw this at 5 o'clock yesterday, and there was no one else in the theater. I watched an entire movie by myself. I have never had that happen. I've had it like when I've brought a friend, but never solo. It was really lonely in there. I was on my phone quite often. Anyway, that's all from me, guys. I hope you enjoy this review, and I'll see you next time.